Well, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for what I hope will be a very exciting conversation about the future of teachers and teaching. My name is Sari Factor. I'm Vice Chair and Chief Strategy Officer of Reimagined Learning. And with us today, I've got a panel of 4 distinguished education deans who lead programs that serve a wide variety of undergraduate and graduate students. And they're going to tell us what's going on in their colleges and schools of education that are really going to help propel the number of teachers and the kinds of teaching that they're doing. So excited to be in part of this conversation with you today. So for much of the past decade, educators, legislators, parents, and community leaders have said we need to reimagine education. We need to reimagine K-12. What should we be teaching? Who should be teaching? How should we be teaching? So we're going to try to answer some of these questions today. I want to start with who will be teaching, because the last 2 years, the pandemic has exacerbated a problem that we've been dealing with in the K-12 world for much of the last decade. The school of education that I went to was enrolling a third fewer students than 10 years ago. Just in 2019. So the question is, where are we going to find teachers? Fill the pipeline. So Carole, I'd like to start with you and ask you to tell us what's going on at ASU. I understand that the enrollments have been up every year since 2017. So what are you doing differently than other schools of education, and what would you recommend?
So luck counts, let me just say that. But really, I think one of the things the big thing that we have done is to really stop thinking about what's happening today with teachers and stop talking about teacher shortage and stop talking about this as a recruitment retention issue and really start thinking about this actually as a workforce development issue. And so we've seen in other fields, including technology, including healthcare, when those fields have actually rethought about who's in the profession, how they work together, how they function, what roles do they play, then it has transformed those fields. And education, I believe, is going to have to do the same thing. So pre-pandemic, we started to think about who are our educators. We stopped using the words like teachers because now we're thinking much more broadly about who people are who actually can come into the field, how do they come from the community, how do we start to think about what we do in terms of people who are already there, our classified staff and other people like that. But I think what has been transformative for us is that we also, we've learned 2 things during this pandemic. One is that, people want flexibility, and 2, that people do not want to be isolated. And teaching has been both of those. And so as we've been thinking about building programs and we're working with school partners, we are now thinking about how do we build teams with distributed expertise that can deepen and personalize learning for kids and build flexible entry pathways and specializations and advancement pathways for teachers. And so we have to do both right now in order to bring teachers to schools. We have to change the way we think about teachers, their roles, what they do, how they work. They can't be in a one teacher, one classroom model anymore. It's not sustainable. But we also need to think about the working condition and the learning environment for kids. And so we're trying to do both. And that is attracting more people to come to us and to start thinking about education as a profession again.
Sounds exciting. We'll dig into that a little bit more later. Robert, you're new in your job, joined National University to lead the Stanford College of Education last August. I think you provide the largest the number of credentials for California teachers. Is that correct?
We do, yes. We really look at the entire state of California as our community. As we start to think about where we need our teachers, I think what we're trying to really focus in on now is how do we directly develop relationships with not only our school districts, but also with our community-based organizations and engage within these spaces, right? To critically think about how to best prepare candidates for the context in which they'll be teaching in requires a sort of dramatic shift in terms of the way, the how, and the where in terms of how we're engaging our future educators. And I think in terms of that talent pipeline, you had mentioned in your opening remarks that parents and community residents and people are clamoring for a reimagination, but they're too a part of the solution. I think that that's actually where the workforce engagement should be. Um, Directly recruiting out of communities and growing our own educators within these spaces, I think will be critically important to really help ensure that our classrooms are filled with, culturally responsive educators who know and understand not only the challenges that are happening within the community, but also the wonderful and rich cultural assets that are there for them as well to support their movement going forward in their own professional career. I think the other element too is to engage in a space that allows us to create more stackable, more portable credentials and allow that to be aligned to the curriculum that we're providing, right? So specializations within the field, be it around social emotional learning or trauma-informed care and practices, these are things that our educators need today, and so we're trying to create that space as well, and really meet students where they are. And by that, I mean literally where they are in their journey, as well as where they are sort of within that context or that space. Because listen, 36 million Americans around our country started college and didn't finish. 6 million of them live here in California alone. And I think we as institutes of higher learning need to do a better job of meeting our students where they are.
Where are you finding the prospective educators? Are the candidates, the teacher candidates that you recruit? Are they coming from the community? You
They
said
absolutely
you engage
are.
in the community.
Yes, absolutely. We have people that are already embedded within community schools. We have parents. We have paraprofessionals. We have school clerks who are saying, "Look, I'm here, and what's preventing me from being in the classroom are these various barriers." And so, I think what we're trying to do is break down those barriers and allow for clearer pathways into the classroom.
Great, great. I'm glad you brought up working in the community because I think schools of education are sometimes accused of being out of touch with the communities that they serve. And I know that each of these deans are very much in touch. Pedro, I'd love for you to talk about your experiences in involving the communities in the various places where you've been in the schools of education.
Thank you. So before I got to USC, for those of you not familiar, is located in South Central Los Angeles. It's one of the poorest communities in Los Angeles. But to the university's credit, they have a partnership with 40 of the schools in that community, as well as in East LA. And what we're doing is now building on that partnership. So we'll train our teachers in those schools. We're developing lab schools in each of those schools to make sure that new teachers don't get the most difficult jobs, and they get support during their first few years, so they'll have ongoing relationships with us. But more importantly, we're gonna make it free for teachers to become teachers, not saddled with debt. And we're working towards that goal. Next year, 2/3 of our master's students will be on full scholarship. And I could tell you a quick story about how I tricked the president of the university to subsidize that. I said, we were in the news for a lot of scandals. I said, this would really help change the narrative, that we're training teachers for at USC. And it worked. So next year we need a new trick. But we're working toward the goal because it's ridiculous that teachers should be saddled with 20, 30 years of debt to do this work. We're also working with LA Unified to develop housing for teachers because it's impossible to find housing on a teacher's salary in LA. And the district has surplus property, which we can work towards developing. Finally, we're working with groups like your AmeriCorps City Year program, after-school programs to get people who are already in schools as tutors into our credential programs because they have the commitment already to work with our kids.
Fantastic, fantastic. Now, Dan, you had initiated a task force on your campus about, reimagining education, the future of education. What have you charged that task force to do, and what outcomes do you anticipate?
Good question. So this task force was actually to reimagine our teacher education program. It's a great program. It did a lot of moves that changed the field, like early placements and discipline-based education. But all the faculty who started that are retiring. So now the new faculty need to say, what do the teachers need? and what can they bring to bear. So our charge looked an awful lot like the framing of this session, except it added pay attention to the context in which these teachers will work and what can Stanford, what are the particular strengths Stanford can bring to it. So they're working. This is a hard problem because there's so many things. But here are three that I think are coming out. One is to prepare teachers to meet the K-12 students where they're at. And so there's two specific areas. One is multilingualism. So a lot of teachers come in believing that, English is the Queen's language. It's what we should speak. It's the students who don't have it are at a deficit for not speaking English. Their experience of life is they are multilingual already. They are speaking multiple languages. This is the natural course. So how do we get the teachers to understand that? Another version of this is inclusion. So 95% or so of regular classroom teachers have kids with special needs. And they're not particularly well trained for this. This is a really stovepiped area where special education, the people who work on that don't talk to general education. So how can we prepare teachers to handle, the 12% of kids who are designated? A second thing that I see coming down is issue-based education. So you've heard of problem-based, project-based. Issue-based is things like climate change, Black Lives Matter, things that have a strong civics component where we want to help students navigate a difficult situation. So this isn't easy to teach about, right? Because the passions are high. So this will be, I think, developing this. The last one is to really work on the professional corridor. So one of my favorite research studies is from about 40 years ago. And what they did is they looked at clinical psychologists' success rate. And clinical psychologists, it actually helps. They do good work. But it turned out that clinical psychologists who've been working for 25 years were no better than those in their first year, right? And the reason was they got a lot of practice, and you've heard the expression practice makes permanent. So what happened was they would not see these patients, they would leave, they would never find out whether it worked or not. And the same thing is confronting our teachers. So how can we develop systems so they can continually grow and get feedback, as opposed to, your twice-a-year professional development where you kind of have stale cake and wait for recess and things like that.
Carole, I'd like to come back to the distributed roles you mentioned. I mean, the role of the teacher has changed so much in the last several decades in K-12, and we put a lot of responsibilities on them, and it can almost seem overwhelming at times. So how have you thought about that, just the distributed roles as you talked about?
So if you come to my office, there's a line around the building, probably twice, of people who want me to build more and more and more and more, whatever their thing is, into teacher preparation. And the fact is that we cannot continue to believe that every single teacher in every single classroom, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, no matter what years of experience, are all going to know the same thing and know what the collective we knows. So we have said, what if we could really think very differently about how we prepare teachers and how we build schools, so that instead of saying, here's the kids, and here's your 30 kids, and your 30 kids, and your 30 kids, how can we start to leverage our assets and start to build schools where we say, here are the kids, and let's figure out who the adults are that those kids need. And context matters. So the same group of adults is not going to be the same group for the same group of kids because they're going to need access to different, but we're trying to build the social capital of kids. We're trying to build a different kind of working condition, right? So then imagine you build those adults, and now you start thinking about how those adults distribute expertise. How many of you work in teams? Everybody. None of you knows what the rest of your team knows, I'll guarantee it, because you lean on each other. And in education, we don't do that. And so as we think about how we're preparing this next group of teachers, and I mean next group, not next generation, it's today, tomorrow, we've got to start to train them how to work on teams. And we have to train them how to lead teams. And we have to train them how to engage the community, to bring in the expertise that they probably do not have and will not have. Because we cannot keep spending billions and billions of dollars on professional learning, believing that every single teacher is going to be a widget teacher. Those days are gone. And so that has transformed what we are doing. It transforms our teacher preparation program, and it's transforming our schools. If you're in a school out there right now who is working towards team-based models, please raise your hand. I have to acknowledge these people.
Fantastic. But it's hard to make change in K-12 schools. So what are some of those ways that you are pushing in to do that?
So we have a lot of leverage, right? So here we sit as a very large teacher preparation program. We are a college of about 7,700 students. And so, we do have leverage. We have convening power. We have the power to work with our partners and say, hey, can we start something new? Can we do something different? And watch how people are raising their hands. And I have to say, I know there's a question that's coming around, what am I optimistic about? And what I'm optimistic about is that we're in a moment and people are actually raising their hands and saying, we gotta do something different today. And so that's the power I think that we have as colleges, schools and colleges of education, is to be able to reach into the community, as others have talked about, but actually create change in a way that is very, very different than anything we've seen. And then you layer technology, and then you layer all the other things. And what happens is somebody raises their hand and says, pick me. And then you see, actually, when you start to build teams and you break that one teacher, one classroom model, everything changes. The schedules change, the way they work together changes. Everything changes about those school models.
Others of you have experience where you're trying to push into different ways of doing things in K-12 schools and finding resistance. Pedro, what do you think?
What I've learned is a kind of common sense lesson, but the schools that need the most help are the hardest to help. And sometimes starting there, it doesn't make sense because you're just banging your head against the wall and you're not making any progress. What I also learned is that when the conditions are right, and that often involves leadership, having the right leadership in place, lots of things are possible. And we need to create models where things are possible. And so working with leaders who have the vision, who have the ability to get beyond barriers rather than allow those constraints to limit, can facilitate change. And I'm seeing districts and school leaders that have that commitment to going beyond the barriers to build the kind of schools that are responsive to the needs of kids. I think the pandemic has heightened our awareness that you can't just narrowly focus on academics if kids don't have a place to live and they're suffering in terms of their mental health. So as we think more comprehensively how to respond, how do we build systems in schools that allow us to meet those needs? When you have leaders who understand that, then you have a partner where you can get that work done.
Find the coalition of the willing, right? It's great.
So I'm going to say something where if my colleagues hear I say it, they'll never talk to me again. So, shh. I've watched us try and use policy as a lever in education. And the problem is it's trying to make people do things they don't want to do. And so I'm a big fan that design is the fastest way to render knowledge into a usable form. And so we're really pushing an initiative that tries to come up with designs that people want to use, they're easy to use, they really make their jobs easier. If you think about YouTube, just about every teacher who has a projector uses YouTube, right? To be able to show a picture of the orbiting planets, it's just so much easier than a textbook. So we're trying to do that. And the challenge with design is that we need a new kind of partnership. So we have lots of partnerships with school districts, community-based efforts, research partnerships where they set the agenda and we try and help them understand it. But when it comes to design, we need partnerships with industry. And so this is why I'm here and what I'm trying to figure out. How can the university partner with industry to get really effective technologies, play patterns, solutions that people want to use?
Do you have any examples that have worked?
Well, the thing that has always worked in education is assessments. Mm-hmm. It used to be if you wanted to make money in education, you make a test, right? But now, there are people who are coming up with really interesting programs of studies, like in math. Our master's students start companies, things like that. They get pretty far, and then they discover that the venture capital actually wants them to sell it. And so they didn't know that, right? So we need to do a better job of getting them prepared.
I'd like to just add that, I think all of these ideas are wonderful, but we can't do this work within schools if we don't have capacity from within, right? Right now we have a leaky bucket, right? Every new teacher that enters into the classroom, they're leaving in just a couple of years. And so how do we create a more meaningful pathway that also leads to the retention aspect so that school leaders that we work with and build partnerships with can really help and sort of build that climate and that culture from within that school. And I think that's the key, right, is how do we as institutions work in partnership to develop that together, right? And so teaching schools, professional development schools, opportunities to engage within the buildings and to both provide support to mentor teachers and cooperating teachers, as well as to those new recruits that we're bringing in, to give them a place to reflect and to learn, and time as well to do that, right? We're asking our candidates to do so much right now in terms of how they're being prepared and what they're thinking about, but no time to just think and think critically and reflect and talk to other professionals and watch them and observe them. We're not giving that time. And so the more that we can utilize the tools that are out there now, as well as the tools within technology to engage and bring people together to do that, I think the better for that effort.
Great, thank you. A lot of people here are interested in technology, and technology looked like it was, kind of the wave that rode over us all during the pandemic. We had a lot of tech providers in the audience. I'd be curious to ask you all about how you see technology best used in the classroom and what you're doing to prepare educators to be in the classroom and utilize technology. What's the proper role?
So I would say there's different layers of technology. So as we're thinking about, right, again, as we think about how teachers begin to work in teams, right, how they share rosters of kids, then you have technology that is supporting, you have AI technology that is supporting, but we've also learned right now we have remote technology that also supports. You've got rural schools, you've got other places that, we're never gonna find enough physics teachers for rural schools. So this opportunity to be able to remote people in, to remote supports and to all of those kinds of things. There aren't companies that are sitting out there in the middle of Arizona. But that technology, right, is part of this. Then you have technology that is helping to both personalize and deepen learning for kids. Then you've got technology, right, that should be supporting the teachers as they're working on teams so that they can be in communication with each other in real time, right, so that they're working together and somebody can yell help or somebody can say, hey, did you notice that, this child did this today? Hey, everybody everybody should notice. Or, we've got a kid that, I've got an idea. Can we change something, right? There's technology that can help us do that. We also are now working with HR systems, right? There's the technology then that helps us to think very differently about our evaluation systems, about our HR systems, about our hiring systems. All of this technology supports kids and teachers. And so it's not a matter of just thinking about the handheld device and the next new program that's going to teach content and curriculum to kids. It's a much, much bigger systems view that I think we have to take as we think about technology. And that's what I want to say to people here is, but please stop thinking about building technology for a one teacher, one classroom model. Like, how do we begin to think about how to build technology, right? To start thinking about how we actually want to structure our schools and how we want to serve kids and how we want to build a better working condition, a better learning environment.
Go ahead, Dan.
So I'll take a shot at this. Excuse me. So this is Generation Z. They were born when the internet had started, right? So they are the inheritance of a cacophony on social media. You can find if you need to do your report on World War II, it's not, can you find a source? It's how do you sort through a million different hits? So I think they kind of know how to use technology, and the technology is going to keep changing. So I wouldn't focus on this is the power switch to turn on the slide projector. That just seems like a misplaced effort. The things they need are how to handle the knock-on effects for their kids, like around social media. How do you prepare children for this? They need some help in being able to develop good taste on what's good technology. So you go on the Apple Store and you end up choosing the free thing because you don't know, or you choose the one that has SpongeBob, right? And that's how you choose your technology. I think the third is to sort of figure out how to integrate it as a productivity tool for the students, would be the third one to work on. So these are all good things for the teachers, but I don't think we need to teach them how to use the Macintosh.
So let me offer a few things. So a few things we've learned. We've learned that assessment works best when it's not used to rank people, but to diagnose learning needs as a tool, not as a weapon against teachers and kids. We've learned that achievement is an outcome measure, right? The way to get there is by deepening engagement, tapping into the natural curiosity of kids so that kids become self-motivated learners, not someone who has to be told what to do. We've also learned that technology is a tool that can facilitate learning, but by itself, it's not a panacea. Larry Cuban, one of your faculty members, an old friend, has been a skeptic about the ways in which technology is often promoted. So let me give you an example that brings us together. I'm in a school in Baltimore. Teacher brings in a hermit crab into her first grade classroom. She's got everybody's attention. She brings in a real crab, though, not a YouTube crab, a real crab. And then she invites their questions. They got lots of questions. They don't know if it's a boy or girl. They don't know where the eyes are. They don't know. And then after looking at the real crab, they go online to study the habitat of the crab, to learn about what they eat. They go deeper, and then they write about the crab. And for the next 2 hours, they were totally engaged. The kids were totally empowered. And I said, why do you bring in the crab? She said, because that has much more power than simply looking at it online. So I would say that we have to never lose sight of the importance of creativity in education. Part of what is boring kids to death is sitting still and being told what to do. We have to move towards empowering them as learners and showing them how they use knowledge to solve problems, to make sense of the world around them.
So Larry Cuban is a historian, and like many historians, he's a little dour on the possibility of change. And so there's some truth to that. So the early technologies were kind of drill and kill. They sort of took the worst of pedagogy and automated it. I don't know that Larry saw what Zoom and the new portal between homes and schools and tutors has opened up. I think this is going to be transformational. This is something that teachers also need to be prepared, where they're going to be seeing parents, in their pajamas, in their home circumstances, and they'll get a better understanding of the kids' lives. Whether this will satisfy Larry and change the grammar of schooling, I don't know, but I think it's a big deal.
A couple of you have mentioned social emotional learning for kids, but the mental health of teachers has certainly been impacted through the pandemic. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you are working with your students in the schools of education to really cope with the anxiety, all the things the pressure that they feel to be able to deliver the outcomes and meet the learning needs of the students that they serve. Who wants to start?
I'll start. We started a program called Mindfulness for Educators, and it is to give teachers tools to deal with stress, to deal with the challenges they face. Again, it's not a panacea. There are certain mental health challenges that mindfulness alone are not going to be good enough to address in our kids or in the teachers. But helping people know there are tools they can use to cope has been really helpful. And that works not just for the people going into the profession, but the people who are already there who are telling us, I'm burning out. I think the great retirement forecast is real. A lot of people are going to choose to leave because the work is simply unbearable. And so we have to find ways to support them, and this is at least one strategy that I've seen that can be effective.
Yeah, we actually changed our whole student services mentality, right? So instead of a whole team, right, of advisors, check, now we actually have a student success team. I don't say we traded, but we did in some ways. Trade people who were traditional advisor, student service folks, And we said, look, if we're gonna practice and we're gonna talk about teams, we gotta build a team of adults around our students. And so we started to hire different kinds of people. We hired people with counseling backgrounds and wellness backgrounds and financial literacy and academic supports and all kinds of things, because what we found was you can't support them enough. There's not enough, the mental health issues of our students is off the chart. I mean, it's always been high, but I think it has just been exacerbated by everything, just like everybody else. And so we've had to build, as a university, as a college, we've actually had to build different kinds of supports and bring different kinds of expertise in to actually support our students. And so we have a Zen Den, and we have all kinds of, around health and wellness. But it is not the same kind of student success team that we had in the past. It looks very different today.
Yeah, and I think the isolation that many teachers felt, and if you think about the team approach, that can do a lot too. Just go ahead. Robert.
At National, we really think about it, from the get-go. With our curriculum, we've mapped it all the way back. We have social emotional learning and CASEL standards sort of interwoven throughout our curriculum to really help our candidates think about how to create those safe spaces within their teaching and learning, but also within their practices in the classrooms that they'll one day have. Creating that space for children is paramount, right? Because we know that all the traumas that many of our students have experienced, of course, exacerbated by the pandemic, these challenges, these traumas that they have experienced and they're enduring are changing the way that their brains operate, right? And so we need to work in tandem and in partnership with, again, with parents and school leaders and community agencies to really provide wraparound type services, not only for our teachers and their sort of mental health and longevity, but also for the students. And I hate to keep harping on this, but we must also retain those teachers within those spaces, because if children continue to experience teachers who come and then leave the very next year, that also adds to the trauma that they're experiencing in their schools.
Yeah, so this is very real. For those of you who may not be paying attention, excuse me again, at Stanford, the number of students who normally go for psychological services is about 10%. Right now, it's up to about 40%. That's across graduate and undergraduate. So the stress, the mental health is very real. We had to reduce our incoming teacher pre-service candidates, our teacher in preparation, because a lot of the cooperating teachers just said, I can't do it now. I can't take on another student. And so we had trouble finding it. So we're sort of like everybody else. We're trying to scramble to figure out how to address this, working backwards. In the future, I think there needs to be an increased emphasis, and I see the field moving this way, on things that we don't just focus on things where there's a right and wrong answer. So we're very good at math. There's a right answer, there's a wrong answer. That's actually not what we care about. But that right-wrong just adds the stress, right? And all the college aspiring students, if I don't get this right, X, Y, Z will happen. So I think there's a movement towards that. Social emotional learning would be an example of moving away from our goal is to educate people to get the right answer. And so I think this is a big movement, but I think it takes a lot of research to figure out how to do it well.
Great. All right, on a final note, I'd love to hear from each of you. I'll give you a couple minutes each to just talk about what you're most optimistic about. We've talked about a lot of negative things that are really impacting K-12 education and teachers specifically. What are you optimistic about? Pedro, you want to start?
Yeah, so about 2 weeks ago, I had a meeting with the members of the state assembly who represent the LA County area. And LA County, just to give you a sense of size, is larger than 38 states, okay? And the focus is on education. What I try to tell them is that if you're concerned about homelessness, if you're concerned about mental health, if you're concerned about economic development, then you've got to focus on education, because all these issues intersect with education. LA has a huge homeless problem. The kids who are homeless are invisible because they're not living on our streets for the most part. They're living in cars. They're doubled and tripled up in apartments. What we're trying to do is to work with the state legislature, which right now has money in California, to think comprehensively about how to cut through some of the constraints that are created by county government, city government, school districts, so that we can start to address human needs. And using schools and education as a pathway into doing that. That, to me, gives me hope. If we can make breakthroughs there. Right now, just think about this. In most of our cities, the lowest paid workers, the essential workers, have the longest commutes, right? They have 2-hour commutes to get to work. That includes teachers, but it also includes the people in our grocery stores, the cashiers. That's not tenable. That's not sustainable. And if we don't come up with solutions to these problems, we're all in trouble.
Dan, what about you?
So I'm going to try and be a little happier. But
I thought that was happy.
no, that was happy. So the pandemic really highlighted that there's two reasons you go into teaching. One is for the mission, and the other is the day-to-day satisfaction of what you're doing. And so when the pandemic hit, the teachers were really stuck with only the mission, because all the satisfactions of interacting with kids, seeing the click of comprehension, seeing them learn, they lost all that. So I'm pretty optimistic that people will rediscover this, that teaching is one of the most satisfying things in the world. Only humans teach. It's really satisfying. They like it. We need to pump up that narrative. Now it's a lot of work, but we need to pump up the narrative. Teaching is one of the most satisfying professions in the world. I wish it were paid more, but in the meantime, it's really satisfying.
Absolutely. Robert?
Well, let's cut the commute time and just recruit directly from the communities. I think that's critical. I'm most excited about a changing landscape in epistemology of whose knowledge matters, right? And refocusing our efforts within community spaces. I think there's a lot of passion within our communities and within our schools already. We just need to learn how to tap into them, how to elevate them, and how to honor their knowledge. Because that's the knowledge that our children need, right? How do we as institutes of higher learning engage in cooperative ways and not lead necessarily, but innovate together, right? Alongside community partners, alongside our practitioners, right? As Carole mentioned, no one has all the answers, but if we can all come together, if we can all leverage our knowledge and our experience and expertise within that context, and again, heighten and elevate what's already there, I think we're onto something.
Great. Carole, you want to add something?
So we always say, right, our imperatives are equity, economy, and our democracy. That has never been more true, and our education system is important. When I started as a dean, I said, this is now my 11th year as a dean, it's my 6th year at ASU, but I said we are going to stop doing programs and projects and activities because that's not getting us anywhere. The grants come, the grants go, and then we have nothing to show for it. So the focus, and what I'm optimistic about, right, is that we can get to a focus on systems and structures and culture, and that as we have begun to shift and we begun to think about this in some different ways, that we actually are seeing people coming and that people are saying, yes, we think we need something different. We are in a moment where this is an opportunity for us to actually change the structure and the system of our schools. And so we've had probably over 150 people come to visit our models. People are calling us. We're working with other organizations like AACTE and AASA and lots of folks, right, that we have met even here who are ready to link arms to think about a fundamental system shift in what we do. And so I am at a time of optimism and feeling like maybe we're at a moment where we could actually shift these systems.
Thank you. That's great. You know, an individual teacher has the opportunity to impact thousands of kids over their teaching career. And I think about these education deans who are preparing educators, and the impact is so multiplied exponentially as each of you do what you do. So thank you for your optimism. Thank you for your leadership. And keep on doing what you're doing. Really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you for a great conversation. Thanks, Sari.